Hello, everyone. We got a good debate tonight. Hopefully, you guys will enjoy it. We got Snake. We got emotionally Emoticon. We got True Empiricism on is evolution imaginary, and we got two 5-minute openings from Snake and Emo, and True Empiricism will forego his, and we'll have an open discussion. So whenever you're ready, Snake, the floor is yours.
All right. And is my screen shared?
Yeah.
Okay. So this debate tonight is whether evolutionary relationships via homologous structures are simply imaginary, aka pareidolia. So what is pareidolia? For those who don't know, it's the phenomenon of recognizing patterns or objects in vague or random stimuli. So how can we tell a legitimate pattern from pareidolia? Can we actually test it? Real patterns are confirmed by specificity of detail, converging lines of evidence, and novel predictions. The more specific the shared details are, the higher our confidence in what it's supposed to be. For example, seeing shapes in clouds or emojis, two dots and a line could trigger our pattern recognition for a face. However, we know it's pareidolia due to the lack of shared detail with a real face. A sync could do the same thing and without intent. More specificity can indicate intent to be a real representation in art, and an actual photograph is an even truer representation because of how specific the detail is. In terms of cave drawings, the image on the right could represent a dinosaur but lacks arms and other crucial details, so it could be any number of things as well. It's so vague that a lot of untrustworthy interpretation is needed to assume that it's a dinosaur. Moreover, the drawing on the left was made ad hoc just to look like the one on the right. But with other cave paintings of animals, we have high degrees of specificity. If there was even a single example of dinosaurs with this degree of specificity ever, we might have real representations of dinosaurs and not pareidolia, but we don't have those. So the recognitions of dinosaurs from vague squiggles is, in fact, a good example of pareidolia. In evolution, we're concerned with whether the pattern of similarity means an inheritance relationship between two or more specimens, and creationists accept this, called comparative anatomy, up to a point. Um, our scientific method is that animals with overwhelmingly similar and specific traits can be modified to get from one to the other, with relatively few modifications. Monitor lizards and snakes are likely to have both evolved from curved-toothed lizards with few changes between them. Something creationist institutions say is possible, while they define snakes and lizards as separate biblical kinds of animals, they admit evolution from one to the other is indeed possible within their narrow limitations. This is because of the high specificity of similarities, and it doesn't break their rules, but we'll see what their rules actually are. This isn't done spuriously. Perhaps hundreds of highly specific traits are taken into account. For example, fish lungs have homology with fish swim bladders, and this is not likely to be pareidolia since no fish has both. And they both grow from the same embryonic structures, indicating that lungs are modified from swim bladders. It's not just a passing resemblance. So, in comparative anatomy, we see highly specific and unnecessary design differences. If penguin, whale, and fish fins all had the same homologous parts, that would be evidence for design, as the nested hierarchies would be interrupted. But instead, flippers are always made from the parts homologous to animals closest in the fossil record and closest in overall anatomy. Penguins shouldn't have bird wing bones in their flippers if creationism were true. Instead, they fit the pattern of being derived from other birds instead of being derived from a common fin design. Phylogenetic trees can be generated by grouping things by similarity, and uniquely, life forms and their traits fall within nested hierarchies of traits, meaning each category shares all traits with its subcategories, which indicates inheritance of modified traits. Design parts can break this hierarchy, but we never see it in nature. Instead, this pattern has the same order as the order of fossils in the fossil record, and when we group organisms by genetic similarity, we get virtually the same nested categories as with physical differences. If we get the same outcome from three different methods, the results are likely to be correct. Another method is taxon correlation, which is actually a creationist method, where species are clustered into kinds by highly similar morphology. But if the distance of variation within a cluster is larger than the distance between clusters, then they are considered a single biblical kind. This is derived from baraminology. For example, the natural range of change within dromaeosaur dinosaurs and within proavians is much larger than the gap between them. So this demonstrates that birds are dinosaurs by creationist standards. Put some feathers on a dromaeosaur, and creationists think it's a bird, proving our point. Creationists often cite coelacanth as a living fossil that has not changed at all, but fossil coelacanths are extremely different from modern ones, with the most recent fossils being closest to living specimens. The fossil record always follows this pattern. These methods are so robust that they've actually been able to predict the patterns in the fossil record as well as the adaptations that diseases will evolve. Not only do we understand and research HIV, for example, through modeling evolution of the virus itself and understanding that apes are our closest ancestors whom HIV came from, but we see organisms evolving resistances in real time, like bacteria, who we can observe evolving new proteins, for example. Another example is endosymbiosis, which explains why mitochondria have a separate and different form of DNA from our nuclear DNA, an unnecessary design choice, but allowed us to predict that it would happen again. For example, a species of amoeba was infected by bacteria, but eventually evolved a dependency on them and could not survive without them, like mitochondria did in eukaryotes. Evolution simulators can create complexity with no intelligent or creative input, from technology like antennae to simulated life evolving new body parts to designing actual new living life forms like xenobots. All they need is selection and random variation, and designs improve and build themselves automatically, often better than engineers can. Modern geology is able to predict where minerals are in the rock layers. Catastrophism cannot. Real science does produce results, which dictates who gets hired and what is made science. Creationism hasn't produced a single treatment or cure for a single disease. Evolution has. By definition, evolution is therefore science. You cannot get consistently successful results from an imagined pattern, so it is in fact creationists seeing intelligent design in nature, which is the pareidolia. Homology is so strong, these jaw fragments are classified as the oldest known snakes by creationists and scientists alike. Even creationists use comparative anatomy when it's convenient. So we challenge true empiricism to put forth consistent criteria for how far we can take comparative anatomy. For example, he should address why he does not agree with the creation ministries about classifying these snake jaws as snakes by their jaw fragments alone. Evolution can repurpose existing structures for new functions and structures, like pineapples. They start as flowers, but fuse as they mature into the fruit we know and love. Evolution is always limited by the existing traits of the parent generation, but rearranging them can create drastic differences in function and structure. Pictured above is the tadpole of the African clawed frog, and below is the lungfish. They're not so different, so slight modification of fish can make a frog. So, what methodology does true empiricism use to tell which organisms are related and which are not? Unless he can tell us which are the original, then it seems to us that he's admitting he really can't tell the difference between designed and adapted species. He has agreed previously, I believe, that ceratopsians are the same kind, and this would be presumably due to comparative anatomy. So, where does comparative anatomy stop working? What is the hard limit? And these are my questions that I have for today. And Emo, go ahead.
Very good. So, EME, are you ready to go? Or
He says his connection's bad. Uh, he might just have a slight delay.
okay.
If not, I guess we can just jump right into it.
Yeah, so might as well head into the back-to-back discussion here.
All right. Just try leaving and coming back in, Emo. Whatever you think, Praise.
Yeah, I'll see if EME gets back in, and we'll try to add him again. If it doesn't work, yeah, I would just say the back-to-back or the dialogue you guys should go to.
I have his presentation, so I could even switch that if that's causing some of the lag.
Have no idea. Yeah, is he just gonna go or?
Uh, he'll probably keep trying, but maybe we should just start the discussion.
Yeah, the cross dialogue. I think that might be better here. Maybe a true empiricism wants to do a rebuttal too. That could be an option.
Well, I can just open up with a statement if I can. Can you guys hear me okay?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Well, I'd have to say this is that what is the title of this debate? Is evolution imaginary? Um, I think that this topic um, really the burden of proof is going to be on the evolutionist tonight. Is evolution imaginary? Well, if we're talking about evolution as just change in allele frequencies over time, I think that we can all agree on that. I think if we're going to talk about common ancestry, that we all share common ancestors with apes, bananas, um, bacteria, elephants, whatever. I think there's a burden of proof there that needs to be met. And so I think that we need to be careful with what we talk about when we mention evolution. I heard something mentioned during your opening response there that evolution helps us to find cures. I'd agree with you that evolution, the changes that we observe and that we can trace back, such as retroviruses with HIV, and we can learn things from the natural world and figure out ways to better adapt. We develop vaccines, whatever. But from the standpoint of evolutionary theory, there's been no studies, as far as I've seen, that has helped us to increase health-wise or something like that. So I think we need to be careful when we talk about evolution, what evolution can actually prove, or specifically, what is it that we both agree on? If we both are just talking about change happens, okay, well, change happens, but is change synonymous with us all sharing common ancestors with one another? I think that's a different thing.
All right. So you mentioned whether or not we're related to bacteria and plants, and the same branches and patterns follow the same patterns that we would use for any other type of evolution in the fossil record. So I think you would have a burden of proof if you were to try and dispute the basically essentially what modern geology is,
Sorry.
and the order of fossils. But would you wouldn't accept that all animals are related? Is that a problem for you?
Can you repeat that, please?
Would you accept that all animals are related, or just do you have a problem with plants and bacteria being related as well?
Well, let's say that once it depends. I mean, if you're talking about something above the genus, I would say that there's needs to be evidence to show that we share some sort of common linkage with one another. Um, you mentioned pareidolia, this pattern seeking. It's a way of describing something or a perception that is not necessarily accurate. If we're going to jump over the confines of a typical accusation that I bring up, pareidolia, that means that there is reasonable justification to show that those similarities or those patterns that you observe have some sort of causal linkage. There is an actual observable phenomena that connects those similarities that you're observing. And so if that's the case, then I would have to see, what the evidence is to show that myself and that elephants share common ancestors with one another. Um, because
Okay.
if we just talk about evolution, if we're just going to mention change, that's very, very vague. There's going to be a lot of things that both of us would agree with. I mean, change can happen. We would both agree on the changes that allowed the us uh, to digest milk. We lost that ability after we were babies, or the MC1R mutation that allows pale skin and red hair. There's a lot of changes that can happen that can allow new traits and even I would grant new abilities. But there's a common practice that we seem to only find from intelligent creators, and that is the ability to build a machine or an object that has multiple components working together in a coordinated fashion, have overall function, right? Like my laptop that I'm looking at right now, it's made out of glass, plastic, silicone, all sorts of different materials in a specific strategic way. That's a pattern that we have at our disposal, right? We know laptops come from intelligent agents. And so I can sit over here and say, based on that pattern, this has come from an intelligent agent. I have something that I could trace back to a root source. But if I'm looking inside of the cell and I'm looking at genetics, which is analogous to codes or languages, we know that comes from intelligent agents. You would say the reverse. Well, the similarities that we're finding there, maybe um, the RNA sequences that might have been left over from viruses a long time ago, these different patterns, this indicates common ancestry. These are the similarities you find there, but you don't have something that you can trace back to a root source that we know definitively that these similar sequences do show that we share common ancestry, or the similar sequences across the board, they show that we share a common ancestry. You know what I'm trying to say? There are certain things in nature that we can trace back to a root source coming from intelligent agents. We can't say the same thing with evolutionary theory. You can pattern seek, and I understand what you're seeing there. I mean, I can picture what you're perceiving, but there's nothing that I can trace back and say, okay, well, we can connect dots. We can say evolution can actually account for this. And so I think the problem is that when we're dealing with things above the genus, kingdom, phylus, domain, and even in certain cases below the genus, you're dealing with some major anatomical changes that need to be accounted for. And it's, staying in the confines of just word games, evolution, change, doesn't really deal with the question. You know what I mean? So I think I think we need to be careful with the type of language that we're using specifically. I mean, you were talking about what creationists argue for or don't argue for earlier in your opening statement there. I don't think that any of that really deals with the issue that creationists actually have with evolution. The issue that creationist ID proponents, people on my side of the fence, really have with evolution is that evolution seems to try to account for certain things in nature that it seems like can only be accounted for by creation, a creator factually speaking. And so I think that what we need to
Okay.
do is see whether or not evolution we can see whether or not the mechanisms of evolution can account for the differences that we're seeing. Because if we can't get to that we can't deal with whether or not evolution is pareidolia or if it's your perception of evolution. We share common ancestors with an ape is imaginary or not.
One
Okay.
second here. I want to see if Emo can talk because he's trying to get in here. So hold on.
Yeah.
Emo, can you hear us? Can you talk? So that looks like a negatory.
Hmm. He sometimes has a delay, but it's usually not this bad. Um.
Yeah, it might be better for him just to sit out on this one because you guys had a good discussion going here.
Okay. Well, I mean, I'm okay with him seeing if he can get in there, but we might have to move on from the opening. Um. So I want to explore what this hard limit to evolution is that you think is there. Um, and so I'd like to establish that the range of change that's observed within a genus actually exceeds the amount of change required to connect all life. For example, we've observed new bones evolving, new structures of bones evolving in the same species, and new proteins in the same species, and coordinated changes like this within the same biblical kinds. Um, so I would like to know basically where that stops in your mind.
It's not important why I think where it stopped. It's where does it happen? You know what I mean? Like where does it happen specifically? Where does it happen? Because I can put, me putting any parameters, I don't know why you would think I would be putting any parameters that I'm looking. If if it can be demonstrated in the literature anywhere that the accumulation of changes have been tested to build any claimed anatomical feature that we're assuming happens, right? Because that's what is always being claimed. Species A has certain similarities to species B, therefore they diverge from one another. Okay, this organism is a little bit further down here. Its similarities, it's not as similar, so we're going to put a little bit further down here. That's what I mean by pareidolia. Pattern seeking You're connecting dots in your head, but what you're perceiving, like clouds in the sky, it's not necessarily there. Now you can get around that by showing, well, whether or not the accumulation of changes lead up to that complexity. And then I can say, I would have to be honest enough to say, well, you know what, you actually do have a demonstration where you can show that evolution has this creative ability. But let me put it like this. I've mentioned it like this before. This is the best analogy that I can think of to put this problem that I have here. Imagine if you have three cups, cup A, cup B, and cup C, and you have a bag of gumballs in your hand, and each gumball is supposed to represent a change over time. And you throw gumballs in cup A, they accumulate, pile over, and they don't do anything. You throw the gumballs in cup B, they accumulate, uh, pile over, and break the cup. In cup C, they accumulate and start to build
Hey,
specific
True. People are
objects.
saying in the audience your volume is a little low. If you could maybe try to get it closer to your mouth again, or try to get back your volume up there.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. So, really quickly, okay, so imagine if you have three cups, cup A, B, and C, you have a bag of gumballs in your hand. And so imagine if you were to take those gumballs, throw them in cup A, they pile over, they don't do anything. Cup B, they pile over, break the cup. Cup C, they start to build objects as you keep on throwing the gumballs in the cup. Let that be an analogy to the claim of change over time, the accumulation of changes over time. Okay, you're making a claim that evolution can accumulate and build distinctive features over time if you give it time. I'm claiming, well, I think that the opposite actually happens. That if you allow changes to continue to happen, organisms seem to uh, denature, devolve. I think that's what a lot of evidence actually shows. Or we can say in some cases they don't do anything. Both of us have a claim on the table. Um, and specifically, what's relevant for this debate is whether or not evolutionary theory is imaginary or not. And so my question is what does the evidence actually show? Because remember, we're talking about science. Science means you have to have some sort of tested mechanism in the laboratory to show your results. And so has the mechanisms of evolution, whether it be gene duplication, horizontal gene transfer, whatever, has any of those mechanisms been tested to show that cup C is going to be the likely outcome? And if so, what is that evidence? It seems that the evidence always is and seems to only always be homology, comparing similarities. There has never been any tested mechanisms in evolution to show if you allow the accumulations to change that fins will emerge or wings will emerge. You know, they compare the bone structure or they compare the similarity and its features and they say, well, this looks similar. It's again, it's pareidolia. You're connecting dots.
But I
And
showed you that evidence. They've run these simulations and they actually will create unique novel features that weren't programmed at all into the simulation, purely through
okay, well,
selection and random variation.
okay, well, let me see them.
It was in my opening.
Okay, well,
Carl Sims did one. They created these xenobots that are able to they're kind of like nanobots, but they're actually alive, and computers designed them. Engineers couldn't figure out the optimal configuration for the cells, and so computers designed them with evolutionary algorithms for the best possible swimming model.
I'm aware of the algorithms that are designed by an intelligence. I get that, but we're talking about we need to see whether or not the mechanisms of evolution have been tested. Natural phenomena.
Yeah, they have. That is testing the mechanisms, selection and random variation. So if you're going to argue that they're intelligently designed, then that's just an argument that's an analogy for theistic evolution, where an intelligence created the first life, but we're arguing for evolution, not for abiogenesis.
But that's what your problem is too, though, isn't it? Because you're not here to defend theistic evolutions. You're right. You're actually right.
Actually, I am. I'm here. I'm stating right now I'm defending theistic evolution.
Okay, well, you still wouldn't have any evidence for that. I mean, you can. There's an argument that you can make there. That's something a little bit different here. Then, see, theistic evolutionists can claim, because that's what that is actually showing here. Algorithms can be produced or created by an intelligence and then allow things to be set in motion for them to start acting upon themselves. But if we're talking about the strict idea of evolutionary theory, where the mechanisms of evolution are being tested by scientists in the literature, well, we got to keep in mind that scientists do not agree with this idea that God created things, then set things in motion for them to start acting upon each other. You're talking about evolutionary theory. You're talking about an unguided processes via
It's
the
not unguided.
strict mechanisms of evolution. So I mean, you're not on the topic you're supposed to defend tonight, then.
It's not unguided, and I'm just trying to isolate variables because most of the biologists actually are theists, and they do believe that God had a hand in created life. And I'm not here to defend abiogenesis because that has nothing to do with how things change. Sorry?
Yeah, that's sort of the problem. We're not here to talk about abiogenesis. We're here to talk about evolutionary theory.
Just evolution, whether or not something can change once it's already there.
Okay.
So and it's not unguided.
That something can change via the mechanisms of evolution. You can't smuggle in God doing it. If you want to do that, then all I have to do is say God did it. I mean,
I'm willing to admit that because I'm just isolating the variables here. I don't care how the origin happened. That's not a part of the argument.
I don't know.
Origins are not
anything about origin.
Origins are irrelevant to whether or not it can change after it exists. And I want to dispel this really bad misconception that evolution is unguided. Random mutation is unguided, but the selection is a guide in a sense. So the environment is guiding every change, every adaptation. It's not unguided.
Okay, let's take this back a little bit. Let's just untangle all this if we can. I am not talking about abiogenesis. You are bringing something in and quickly trying to shift the goalpost to defend theistic evolution, which is a different topic altogether. If we were talking about theistic evolution, I would debate that. But tonight we're talking about whether evolutionary theory is imaginary, right? And so
so that has nothing to do with abiogenesis.
There's a computer program that's been created by programmers, and so in this simulation, it works out. That's not natural phenomena. That's not dealing with science. Science is dealing with the natural world, not some sort of program that's been created by intelligent agents and then to simulate whatever those parameters are that have been set there by an intelligent agent. You're not dealing with evolutionary theory at all at this point. We're not even talking about abiogenesis. It's just that you're not on the topic you're supposed to be defending.
Theistic evolution is the same thing as normal evolution. There is no difference. Just forget theistic evolution. All I'm saying is if you ignore origins, which is what we're doing if we just focus on evolution, what I'm defending is consistent with both theistic and atheistic evolution. So let's just ignore origins. Let's isolate the variable just to evolution.
Okay, so do you think that theistic evolution is evolution?
Yeah, that's what I just said. It's the same thing. After origins, it's the same thing. The only difference between theistic and atheistic evolution is the origin of life, not the change that happened afterwards.
Well, I'm sorry, you're wrong. Theistic evolution, and you're right. I mean, I'm not talking about abiogenesis either. I don't know why you're thinking that I'm talking about abiogenesis, but theistic
I'll tell you why.
Evolution. If you're thinking that God set things in motion and then started, I mean, where is that in the literature? You're telling me that that's what scientists agree with? That God
I'm saying
that's what evolution is about. It's the same thing. No, I mean,
I'm saying that that post-origin, it doesn't matter what the origin is. Evolution unfolds the same, whether you're talking about that origin was abiogenesis or a god. And the reason I brought up abiogenesis is because you tried to compare evolutionary simulators to intelligent design, and that analogy only goes as far as theistic evolution.
Okay, but what is your argument for evolution? I'm not defending abiogenesis. All I'm doing is trying to point out that your defense of theistic evolution is shifting the goalpost. I don't care whether you are holding to theistic evolution. You're not here to defend theistic evolution. You're here to defend evolutionary theory, right? So you're not on topic. You're not defending what you're here to defend.
It is on topic because you had a problem with evolutionary simulators. And the only difference between a simulator that was created and a simulator that just comes from nature is the origin of that simulator, not how it changes.
Okay, well, so you're making an argument to defend a natural theory based on a simulation that was set in motion by intelligent agents.
Again,
so
the origin does
where are
not
the
matter.
mechanisms of evolution being tested? Where are the mechanisms of evolution being tested? Are there any sort of literature showing that we have observed gene duplication?
Mechanisms
Here's the end result of it.
The mechanisms are the same. The origin is not the same, but the origin is not what we're debating. We're debating the mechanisms. So the mechanisms in the simulator
to defend it, then.
The mechanisms in the simulator are the same as in nature. The origins are not, but the origins are irrelevant.
So what are you where's your evidence then? You're basically just telling me
you don't seem to want to engage with the evidence of the simulators.
That's not evidence.
It is, because those are the mechanisms of evolution at work. Yes, it is. The simulators are testing
that was developed by intelligent creators. And give me specifically what it is that you're talking about, too.
The simulators.
This because you're not going to actually give me any mechanisms of evolution tested, the natural phenomena actually being tested. You want to talk about a computer simulation. That's what you want to talk about.
Because they're testing the mechanisms of random variation and selection together. That's all I'm focusing on. It doesn't matter where they came from.
You don't have any example, though. So you're going to say that you're not willing to defend any example of a real-world phenomena being tested. Instead, you're going to jump to a computer simulation. That's what you're going to defend.
That's my first example, yeah. To see whether you would deny it or not.
But there was a second example? What was the second example?
Plenty. Why are you running away from the simulators?
The simulators isn't proving anything for you.
It's a test of the mechanisms.
Design, theistic evolution.
You asked for a test of the mechanisms in a scientific setting.
What mechanisms did I ask you for?
The evolutionary mechanisms, which in its most basic forms is random variation and selection.
Okay, so that was those random variation and changes were tested. Specifically, what mechanisms of evolution though were tested?
Random variation and selection.
What mechanisms of evolution were actually tested?
Random variation and selection. Are those not evolutionary mechanisms?
Specifically, was it gene duplication? Was it mutation? What was specifically tested? A real-world natural phenomena was tested.
Mutation and selection.
Okay, well, let me see it. How was mutation tested?
Because the computer randomly changed the code. And the designs improved themselves by randomly changing the code.
We didn't see this. There was no test in the labs that actually show this happen. There was a computer simulation, right? We didn't see anything like this actually happen.
Computers are in labs. There's computer labs. That's part of the research. So if you want to move on to living examples.
Besides the fact that you still haven't shown me gene duplication, mutation, or any specific variation you're referring to, you haven't gotten into the specifics of any actual mechanism.
Yes, I have.
What specifically about? Okay, you have. How?
What is not specific about mutation and selection?
Okay, the only thing you keep on telling me is that you've proven your points because of a computer program.
Yeah, it tests the mechanisms, whether or not they can automatically approve.
That was set in motion by an intelligent creator, right?
Which is consistent with theistic evolution.
That's not the mechanisms of evolution, now is it?
Yes, it is.
Evolution is an unguided process.
No, it's not. No, it's not.
Okay. Well, you want to say that it's not because
selection is not unguided.
Because of natural phenomena, okay?
The environment is not unguided. It is guiding the process.
Okay, stay there then. Stay in the environment. Do you understand the problem here?
The environment was simulated.
Oh, simulated. No actual example in the real world. A simulation by intelligent agents who have preconceived notions already about evolutionary theory being true, setting parameters to reap the results that they hope to get. I mean, no, I want to see real world, just like in any other scientific theory. I want to see real world phenomena. This is what science is supposed to be. testing the natural world, right?
What the simulations tested was whether or not random variation and selection in swimming environments or jumping environments where they had to
You just keep on
get over
repeating
something
yourself.
or
You're at a point where you're
competition,
just repeating yourself now.
these
I
designs
get what.
these designs automatically improved themselves from these basic mechanisms. Now, in the real world, so what would you be looking for?
Oh,
Because we have examples of this happening in actual animals and
maybe
other
not
organisms.
hearing me. Is this microphone working?
Yeah.
Okay, because I don't think you're
Yeah.
hearing anything I'm trying to point out to you right here. So you keep on jumping on this issue, okay, of a computer program. I love the idea of a computer program, and I think you would have a good points to make as a theistic evolutionist using that argument. Okay, so just try to follow me here. Tonight we are here to talk about evolutionary theory as to whether or not that is imaginary. Evolutionary theory is the idea that small variations and changes over time will allow species A to become distinct from species B. We all share common ancestors with something a long time ago. And so the idea here is that there are certain natural phenomena through time that allows that to happen. Gene duplication, mutation, horizontal gene transfer, vertical gene transfer, whatever mechanism you want to posit. Okay, stay here. It is the natural phenomena that needs to be tested to show whether or not this pattern that you are observing is a legit conclusion to come to. And so it seems to me that rather than you answering the question and dealing with what natural phenomena have been tested in the literature to show that your cup, remember the example I gave you, cup A, B, and D, your cup C is the legitimate conclusion. You jump to something that I think that we would both agree on. You're a theistic evolutionist. I'm a
Well, I'm not.
creationist. Okay, I don't know why you said that you would defend that then earlier.
Well, just
So
because I was
you
trying
said
to
that you would
isolate the
defend it.
variable.
Okay, you said that you would defend it earlier. Okay, I don't want to get sidetracked. That's the point. Um, let's not move on to red herrings. Let's not try to ignore the problem by trying to shift the goalpost and talk about origins. The problem is whether or not the mechanisms of evolution have actually been tested. Remember what I was talking about earlier, whether or not there have been a causal linkage to show that your conclusion is an actual real world capability. And so I gave an example of a computer, for example. We know we can trace that back to a root source. That pattern has always come from an intelligent agent. You claim that there are certain that evolution can do the same thing, that it's not imaginary, it's not just pattern seeking, it's not just pareidolia. And so the question is, what real world phenomena that can you show? Instead of you dealing with that issue, you're jumping to a computer programmer setting things in motion so that some sort of simulation can show a favorable result for you. And so that simulation isn't showing me anything. It's not showing anything in an objective way. You're still stuck in the confines of subjectivity. You can perceive it a certain way, say, well, okay, well, a computer programmer set it in motion, that it started acting upon itself, and hold to that subjectively. But if this is going to be an objective discussion here, we're talking about science. Science is dealing with natural phenomena. So what tested mechanisms can you show to show one of the common arguments that it uses ATP synthase? And I know that a lot of people hear me bring that up a lot of times, but the reason why is because I think it's an easy thing to understand. I think it's a very straightforward argument that really can't be diverted. Here's what I mean by that. We're going to talk about DNA, I used that as an example earlier. That's analogous to a computer program. It's a very common argument that we hear from ID proponents. But the problem is that once you start talking about DNA, evolutionists also believe that it's evidence for evolutionary theory, right? I mean, just like I brought up to you earlier, there are certain endogenous retroviral DNA that you find inside of our genetic code, right? So the argument can go back and forth, but we jump over dealing with the issue that I'm bringing up here, pareidolia. You always jump to pareidolia. You'll look at patterns and you'll perceive things a certain way. But if we're dealing with something like a turbine, like the ATP synthase, you can't make that vague. It's just it is what it is. That seems to be acknowledged inside of the literature. seems like scientists on both sides of the fence agree that it is what it is. And so there's an example there of where we know an intelligent agent can produce something. It's been traced to a root source, but no example of evolution accounting for specifically that. And so you mentioned the mitochondria. The mitochondria is actually where the ATP synthase is located, and you use the mitochondria because it has different DNA and to that of the cell that it's located inside of. But the ATP synthase is found inside of that. That's where a lot of this production of our energy is found. So, I mean, how can you show where the evidence of something like that can come from? I mean, the specific object that we know as a uniform property of coming from an intelligent agent. The floor is yours. Go ahead.
Hey, can we? Emo
Yeah,
says
I'm
he
gonna try
has.
to get Emo in here real quick.
Yeah.
Emo, can you hear us?
Can you hear me?
Yeah. There we go. So we got you in here going. Hold on 1 second.
Sweet. Do you still want to do your opening?
Yeah, it would have to be pretty
Oh no,
short.
I think it would be. It'll be a bit too late for that.
Yeah.
You guys can keep your conversation going. I'm just going to add Emo real quick.
Okay. Have you been keeping up with the conversation?
Right. So I have been keeping up with the conversation. Apparently, well, true empiricism doesn't accept the simulated evidence of evolution. So I guess as much you would like to see more real world evidence to show that evolution can produce the kind of things we assume or we state it produced, pretty much. We can first start off by using organisms that they already accept are related. When creationists accept organisms are related, they accept them with all their similarities and the differences without question. For example, creationists have no problems accepting that camels and llamas are related because they can hybridize or interbreed and whatever. And all the differences between them is accepted without question. All right. So evolution can, at least we know that evolution can produce differences between organisms that creationists would accept. All right. But what I was trying to find is to what extent do they accept this variation? And then we can kind of move on from there because they don't actually say how much change they would accept. And it's difficult to know where the limit is. True empiricism doesn't give a limit. I don't know why he doesn't give that, but it would be nice for him to at least give a limit to what he accepts, and then we can move on from there instead of discussing things that he already accepts, you know?
Well, were you finished? Were you done with your response?
So yeah, I'm done with that part. So basically, so you said that you want to change to show that evolution could produce anatomical change, but I need to know exactly what you mean by anatomical change, since in terms of evolution, the anatomical change is usually just a modification of pre-existing traits. So what exactly are you looking for that would count as anatomical change to you?
Well, I don't think the issue is anything that has to do with me. I mean, this topic has to do with evolutionary theory. The burden of proof is on you guys to prove the claim. So, I mean, if you guys think that we all share common ancestors with all of us are related, bananas, orangutans, chimpanzees, humans, ants, there is evidence that needs to be provided for that. And so you talk about why don't I put parameters on it? Well, it's because it's not up to me to put parameters on anything. It's up to you guys to show what evolution can do or cannot do. And so, I mean, I think that's what the issue is.
But you do accept that some things are related, and so you are putting a limit on it.
I'm not putting a limit on anything. I mean, I could accept that certain things are related that can give offspring.
So what about domestic?
There's no claim there. Just accepting what is observable. What is observable is that certain things can give offspring.
What about domesticated rabbits and wild rabbits? Do you think they're related?
I couldn't hear you. You talked over me. What'd you say?
Do you think wild rabbits and domesticated rabbits are related?
Wild rabbits and domesticated rabbits?
Would you accept that?
I'd say they are. I'd say they are, probably. It depends on what species you're talking about.
Well, they can't breed, so according to the
Doesn't-
criteria that you gave us, they're not related.
That doesn't tell me anything at all. I mean, I've talked about
Okay.
this with this guy, actually, and
That's
quite a
good.
few times over the years. And here's what my issue is. I mean, I would agree. I mean, even that some of the finches in the Galapagos, and there's fishes in the ocean as well that have their chromosomes rearranged so that they can't breed with each other anymore. There are a lot of different organisms that can't breed or won't breed with one another, and you can dub that a speciation event for one reason or another, but that's just a subjective label that you're attaching to them. It might be true that they have developed some sort of physical abnormality that causes them to not be able to breed with one another, but that doesn't tell me that therefore we all share common ancestors with the ape. It's just that they have maybe depleted their, maybe I should say depleted, but they've developed some sort of deformity that won't allow them, whether it be genetically or some sort of other deformity, or they just might not have any interest in breeding with one another. So I mean, it just doesn't tell me anything. I don't get to declare it to be anything other than two organisms no longer breeding, and the evolutionists claiming that this means something more than just that is jumping the gun. And so I can't do anything with that.
Ema?
Yeah, so that's the thing is that you accept evolution, but you don't say to what point, and it's kind of difficult to know because you said that evolution is an illusion where homology is a form of pareidolia and whatever, but you can't seem to provide a method or a means of identifying what
don't need
is
to. It's not my
pareidolia from natural common descent. But you can't argue pareidolia if you don't know how to identify it. Now we have ways and means of identifying common descent, and it. I'm sorry.
I think I clarified that earlier about what you meant about pareidolia. You weren't speaking, but I
Right.
talked about that earlier.
Okay, so can similarities be used to establish common ancestry?
No, it can be. It can be used, but just similarity doesn't show me anything. You have to account for those differences.
No.
Evolutionists typically always want.
But that's the point. The point is the only way to establish.
It's the differences that are actually important, that are never dealt with.
So you said that they can.
Right.
But
So
at what point does that stop?
We could deal with the similarities and the differences, but
I explained that earlier. Actually, I think there's a delay on your end. I can hear the echo after I'm talking, so there's a delay on your side.
Yeah, there's a delay on Emo's side.
It's just a couple seconds. Unless it just got worse.
yeah, sorry about the slight delay. Kind of lost what I was going to say. So the similarities between organisms, when you compare similar organisms, and you, for example, you accept that dogs are related and so on, yes, because they're similar, and you also accept the differences. So the differences and the similarities the similarities and the similarities is used to establish common ancestry. You said that you can't use similarities to establish common ancestry, yet in the last hangout, you said that humans, Homo sapiens, are related to Homo erectus, for which we have no direct evidence of them interbreeding, only the similarities we have for them, and then you assume that they're related solely based on similarities.
Because they're human.
How do you
Homo
know?
erectus, I mentioned Homo erectus, Homo archaic, and Homo neanderthal because of their DNA.
How do you know that that's not just created separately, but similarly?
Why would I think that?
Exactly. Why? Why either way?
You got to make an argument here, not
What?
you're not saying.
How similar is similar enough for you?
It's not about similar. It's about what the organism is.
So how do you define that Homo erectus has Homo DNA?
because they were humans. They are humans.
How do you know?
If you look at Homo erectus, Homo archaic, and Homo neanderthal, we can look at their genes, we can look at their bone structure, we can look at their the brain anatomy that they have, at least from the imprints of what we find inside of their skull, and we know that they are humans. But if we look at what supposedly we diverged from, the early apes like Australopithecus and so on, they're distinctly different. You can look at their bones, and you can look at the bones of some of the even modern apes.
Okay.
You can clearly tell that you're looking at orangutans and chimpanzees.
Your mic's kind of muffled there. True.
And so, can you hear me?
Yeah, better there.
Okay, so just to make this crystal clear, it's not about the similarities with me. It's about the causal linkage that we have. And I've explained that earlier with the examples that I've given. But it's the differences that need to be accounted for. I mean, for example, chimpanzees and humans, we supposedly diverge from some common ancestor a long time ago. Typically, it's claimed that we share about 96 to 98% of the same DNA. That sounds amazing, now doesn't it? But there's a distinct difference between humans and chimpanzees that we can see when we look at them. And those differences might sound small, but that's the difference of about 30 to 48 million nucleotides in difference. We have different rib cages that bulge out, different brain anatomy, and so on. So I think that the issue here is how you account for those differences. Once you start, you can talk about similarities all day long, but similarities to an extent, when you're dealing with certain specific organisms that we're looking at, there are certain things that need to be accounted for, because now we're starting to talk about what those changes emerging because of that continuation of changes, right? Changes continue to happen, the changes in our low frequencies continue to happen, then we see that distinctive change over a long period of time. And so what I'm trying to say here is that if we want to talk about humans, well, we know what humans are. We have examples of what humans are today. We have that causal linkage. So when we look in the past and we see different species of humans, we know what they are because we have a standard to apply that to. But with evolutionary
Which
theory,
is
when we start talking about a distinctive topic here of accumulation of changes having the creative ability to cause all of us, every organism on this planet, to have all of these distinctive traits, that's a phenomenon that hasn't been tested. That is an object there that we can't say we've tested these natural phenomena, and so now we can sit over here and claim that this is an actual real world possibility. So when I'm talking about similarities, I'm talking about causal linkages. We have real world things, an available real world thing here to look at and say, this is something that we know is actually here to look at. And so we see this in the past. Okay, it's the same thing. Okay, that's it. This is similar to this. Okay, well, that's what this is. You're saying, well, what? This organism looks similar to this one, that one, that one, that one, that one. This one's not as similar, therefore we all share common ancestors with one another. That one's not as close, so we're going to put that further down the line because of similarities. Okay, I can, like I said earlier, pareidolia. I can see the patterns that you're seeing, but what I don't see is anywhere in the literature the tested mechanisms that show that the accumulation of those changes can account for those similarities. We don't have that causal linkage, and if we do, I would love to see any article that you can provide me that is not going to just talk about homology or similarities. I can guarantee you any article you're going to show me is going to show me exactly the same thing.
so it's not just that they're similar, it's that the similarity is so close that the natural variation accounts for differences. And we are genetically closer to chimpanzees than gorillas are to chimpanzees. So I'm not sure where you're drawing your standards. And what is the standard that defines human? Because humans meet the standards that classify apes. So I just have a question. Are you claiming that rib width cannot change within related kinds, or the skull shape can change slightly, the snout can slightly smush back like a pug from the dogs? Bones can change, can't they?
Yes, they can.
Okay, so how is that difference between humans and chimps too large a difference to be accounted for by natural variation?
Why don't we talk about something different? Why don't we talk about something
Because I'm
specific?
pushing you? Because you can't answer the question?
I answered your question. I have a problem with whether or not bones can change, but the way that our organs are being held in and the way that our brain anatomy is, for example, between chimpanzees and humans, there's a difference there. But I'm not going to get stuck there.
Most
But
of
we're
it
going
due
to
to
spend
gene loss.
I
Our
don't
brains
think
are larger because we have a gene that does not suppress brain growth anymore.
okay, well, let's
So
get on
gene
okay,
loss is possible. Bone width change is possible. What?
okay.
So the natural variation accounts for all these differences.
Okay. Show me how the natural variation can account for the chromosome 2 fusion.
We've observed chromosome fusions.
Okay. Specifically, I'm talking about in chimpanzees and humans, right? Chimpanzees and humans, we supposedly diverge from a common ancestor, like I just mentioned. Chimpanzees and humans, or human beings specifically, we have a specific type of chromosomal fusion. That is actually cited as the most powerful arguments for us sharing common ancestor with chimpanzees. And so what I'm trying to do here now is attack that strongest piece of evidence that you have. Give me an example of a chromosomal fusion like that happening inside of nature.
We have examples of chromosome fusions happening in nature and in the laboratory. And between humans and chimps, we have mostly the same genes and mostly the same locations. And there's absolutely no reason for that in a created kind. If God could have just put them all in different locations.
Actually, I believe to the right of the exon of one of where the supposed centromeres are, there are numerous genes that are not found in any ape on the planet, but they are very, very similar. You're right about that. But
genes can change.
no, it's not that anything changed there. They don't exist on any organism on the planet. But let's stay here.
But you just said they're similar.
I'm not talking about them being. I'm talking about the overall 90% or 80% of the whole entire fusion site is very similar. But there are thousands of genes that are found on one of the sides of the chromosome that is not located on any ape on the planet. But let's stay here specifically. What specifically is the type of fusion that we're seeing within humans?
What is the type? Why does that matter?
Because the type of fusion that we're finding inside of humans, if it were to happen on any other organism, would have probably killed them. So if you know of the type of fusion event that happened here, that's pretty important.
Why are you claiming it would have killed them?
Well, do you know what the type of fusion is?
Yeah, we've observed those things.
What is it?
Why is that a problem?
You don't know what is it? If you don't know it, just tell me.
Well, I don't know what you're getting at. I mean, there's several things I could say about it.
Tell me, what is it?
You're the one making the case. Why don't you tell me?
Was it a satellite to satellite DNA fusion? Was it a satellite DNA to telomere fusion? What was it?
I don't remember at this moment, but
it
doesn't matter because we've observed both.
Oh, we've observed telomere to satellite DNA fusions and satellite to satellite DNA fusions, but we've never observed the telomere fusion like we're observing inside of human beings. If so, give me evidence for it.
All right, I'm looking it up right now because I have a paper for it. Emo, you got any thoughts? Are you still there?
If you have a paper for it, you can just pull it up right now, read it.
Yeah.
I guess while you're doing that, we're probably going to get ready to go to questions and answers because we've been going on for a good hour and 15 minutes or so. So we'll give you about 10 more minutes of this cross discussion, and then we'll get into questions and answers.
Okay, so I've got a couple of these here. I'll just name them off for you because I can't read the whole thing. Origins of human chromosome 2 ancestral telomere to telomere fusion, the nature of telomere fusion, and a definition of the critical telomere length in human cells.
Read it. I know you just Googled this, so you probably are not aware of what it says, so just read it.
I'm not going to read the whole paper for you right here. But that's not
Why
a
not?
problem. Why is
Read
that a
the
problem?
abstract.
The abstract?
Well, the fact that you're asking me that is
That's not a
indicating
problem.
to me that you've not researched.
Telomeres are not functional
The
DNA
fact that
parts.
you would ask me that, the very fact that you would ask me that indicates you have done no research on this at all. Telomere, if a telomere was to be messed with, more than likely it would have triggered apoptosis. It would have caused cell death. This is actually
No.
a very, very common. What?
Not always.
I understand.
In fact,
Like
telomeres
still,
degrade as you live.
I know. Thank you for that. But you don't know what I'm talking about. So I
Because
mean,
it's not a problem. It's actually just a problem that's spread around in creationist
didn't
circles.
even know what it was until I just said it to you. So how are you going to tell me that it's not a problem?
Because
You
there are
just
many
learned about it
aspects
just
to
now.
the fusion, and I don't know which one you're talking about.
Okay, well, that's kind of a silly thing to say to me. I mean, what do you mean there were many aspects to this fusion? It's pretty common knowledge on both sides of the fence from evolutionists and young Earth creationists, and I'm not a young Earth creationist,
Well, I don't.
that is looked at as a telomere fusion. So
I don't know whether you're talking about that or the fact that there are genes between it or the extra genes that are not found.
Why would you think I'm talking about the genes between it?
Because that's part of the fusion.
What is part of the fusion?
There's a whole structure of that chromosome, and I don't know what you're talking about. If you just ask me what kind of fusion is it?
The centromere? Like, what are you talking about?
I mean, I've just explained this. So I'd just be repeating myself.
You didn't explain anything. What did you think that I was? What were you confused about at first that you thought that I was talking
didn't know what aspect you were talking about, so I just asked you.
The only aspect that you could have concluded from me bringing up the chromosome fusion in humans should have been telomere fusion. You should have picked up on that as soon as I asked you the question, and then you should have, brought in some example like Ken Miller or something. He's got some retorts that you didn't know to go there. So maybe we should just go to Q&A.
So should we have a closing statements or anything?
Yeah,
like
if you guys want a closing, go ahead. Then we'll go to Q&A.
Is Emo there at all still backstage or anything?
No.
Okay. So we have observed this kind of fusion. We've observed all kinds of fusions. Loss of telomeric functions can result in fusion events. And so these and bones can change shape, change width and scale. They can even change we have a species
Can you
of
clarify that,
catfish.
please? Loss of telomeric functions. How does loss of telomeric functions cause fusion events? Can you please clarify that?
It doesn't have to cause it, but basically, if a telomere is losing its function, then what you were talking about that triggers apoptosis is not going to get triggered. So if I could continue with my closing. I couldn't hear you.
What do you think the telomeres are?
They're end caps to the chromosomes.
Yeah, I think this would be the closing section here, True. So we'll let him finish his closing. And then if you guys want to discuss something after that for a few minutes, that's fine.
Yeah, so weird things can happen.
I'm sorry. Yeah, I'm sorry. There's a delay. Go ahead.
Weird things can happen in the cells, and stuff that usually can kill cells has been observed to actually not be as much of a problem in some cases. And I mean, that's how evolution works. It's a heap of mutations that don't work and that kill the organism. And guess what? They get removed from the gene pool. The one time it works, that can stay in the gene pool. And we know why a telomere to telomere fusion might work, and that's because the telomere could have lost some of its function. And so evolution works by trade-offs most of the time, where you're editing one gene for another one. You're giving up in the case of whales, you're giving up your land lifestyle for a marine lifestyle. And in telomeres, you're giving up your telomeres on one chromosome. Maybe you start to get unhealthy there, but that opens up venues for a fusion, and then you're saved. So we know that all the genetics that separate us from apes can happen. We know that all the physical things that separate us from apes can happen because these are just tiny minor differences. And so we could barely even scratch the relationship within apes, let alone go as far as relationships between mammals. Uh, the loss of limbs, or loss of hind limbs, the movement of the nostrils, and elongation of the tail and loss of hair could create a whale from several different mammals. And all of these things are possible, have been observed in real time, and are admitted by creationists to be possible. AIG says otters are related to weasels, and those are huge changes. Those are exactly the kind of changes that we're looking for. Their tails flattened out, lost hair, their back feet became paddle-like. We know that animals can basically shrink the size of their limbs. They can change the size and scale of their bones. All of this, these points I'm making, is that natural variation accounts for all the differences between all organisms. And just about every single proposed difference has been observed. And the ones that haven't been directly observed, those mechanisms have been observed. And we can test those mechanisms. And those simulators do accurately represent those mechanisms in reality. And I guess I'll end there.
Go ahead, True.
Yeah. I'd like to just, I guess, sum up this entire discussion. The burden of proof here wasn't on the evolutionists to show that whether or not evolutionary theory is imaginary or not. And we stayed on the confines of this idea of pareidolia that was mentioned at the beginning of this discussion, which has to do with whether or not certain patterns are legitimately being perceived or are legitimately what they are. That's the best way to sum it up. And we've seen absolutely no evidence at all from any evolutionists in this room to show that any accumulation of changes can account for any similarities that we're observing. We heard about a lot of claims about hair and whales, and everything stayed in the confines of the subjectivity of what an evolutionists can subjectively perceive. But there's been not a single article shown by any evolutionists in this room showing that the mechanisms of evolution have been tested in the laboratory to show their results. Remember, if we're dealing with science, science is dealing with means of knowledge and to know, and it is dealing with tested, mechanisms for the claims that are being posited. So there's been not a single piece of evidence that's been shown at all. And more importantly than that, if you're going to talk about AIG, I don't care. If you're going to talk about what young earth creationists claim, I don't care. I'm not a young earth creationist. I don't even care if you're going to talk about what ID proponents say or anything like that. I care about what the scientists say on both sides of the fence and what they can show in the literature. That's what I'm concerned with. If you cannot provide any evidence at all, I mean, you have not provided a single piece of literature at all to prove your point, well, then unfortunately, you haven't met your burden of proof, and I cannot accept your assertions that you're making, because this is the only thing that I'm hearing from you is simply assertion after assertion, evolution, this, that, or the other, but no articles thus far I've seen you provide to me. And moving on to the point that I brought up about the telomere fusion. This is an extremely important topic because this is posited as one of the most powerful pieces of argument of evidence for evolutionary theory. The problem is that telomere fusions would trigger apoptosis, like I brought up. But we know that, for example, in regular fusion events with Robertsonian translocations, or satellite to satellite DNA or satellite DNA to telomere fusions, that whenever these things happen, they have the potential of causing a lot of birth defects, or in many cases cause organisms to become infertile. And so now we're talking about a telomere-telomere fusion that is extremely rare to the point of being almost non-existent inside of nature. And on top of that, it's going to happen more than one time so that it can be passed on so that we can all have this trait, right? You're going to have more than one partner to actually have this happen. Because I mean, for example, in certain cases where you have a fusion event with maybe a human, and they might be healthy, but because their chromosomes are rearranged in a different way, they might not be able to breed with somebody who is healthy, who has normal chromosomes. That's the example that I brought up earlier that relates to it, I guess, about the fishes that have a different layout of chromosomes. They might not be able to breed with one another, but they still are what they are. It's a deformity. And so we're talking about a telomere-telomere fusion event, which more than likely would have killed the organism before it would have happened, or if it would, or I'm sorry, if it would have happened. If it would have happened, now the organism would have survived. More than likely, it would have been born with some sort of deformities or health defects. And on top of that, it's going to happen so that it can be more than one time, so it can be passed on. It's going to whatever organism inherits that trait is going to have to be able to pass that trait on. So I mean, the problem compounds upon itself if the guy actually did research on it and studied it and knew the potential problems. I was actually back and forth with actually several scientists over this topic, and I've read through these emails actually on some of my hangouts in the past. Geneticists on both sides of the fence and a couple of marine biologists. And they all say the same thing that I'm saying here now. All this information isn't coming from me. It's coming from the mainstream scientists. And so, no, this is not something that typically happens. No, we haven't seen any evidence of this in nature. All we see is an already established organism, human beings that have this trait. And let me move on to this right now, because this is really, really important. There's another argument that could have been made here if we could have gotten a little bit further into this, to where I could have granted that this is actually a fusion event that happened, right? That this is an actual fusion event that happened. Because there's an argument there that could be made that there was a legitimate telomere-telomere fusion that happened, but it would make more sense that it was genetically engineered that way because we were not supposed to be like the apes. These things like this don't happen typically inside of nature, what we see with human beings. And so, there's an argument that could have been made there if I were to grant anything that he would say about the telomere-telomere fusion events happening, and it happens inside of nature. It doesn't happen inside of nature, actually, for the reasons that I brought up. But I think in reality, if we were to look at it from a telomere-telomere perspective, it's a very powerful argument for intelligent design. But we couldn't even get that far because, unfortunately, I don't think the people here were aware of the arguments behind it. But that's it. I'm ready for the Q&A.
All right. Good discussion. So we'll start with Andrew Handelsman. $2 super chat. Here's some money for coffee for staying up later, James. Well, I don't know about that. So here's Andrew Handelsman again, super chat for $2. Here's a coffee for you too, praise. Ah, sweet, man. Love coffee too. I love it. Appreciate it, brother. Here's one from Sigi Fredo Sarabia, $2. Snake. This is for Snake. Are mutations good? Is that what's agreed today?
Some mutations are good. For example, like the fusion. The fusion could have saved the chromosome from telomeric degradation. So in that study that I just cited, The Nature of Telomere Fusion and a Definition of the Critical Telomere Length in Human Cells, it says, our data indicated that if a cell population maintains a telomere length distribution that extends below critical length, it can be subjected to telomeric fusion. And they detected those fusions in the experiment. We detected them at the frequency of 4 times 10 to the negative 6. So they did detect fusions, and we have in the Lenski experiments, we've had mutations that were beneficial, and in tons of other experiments with bacteria, that they've developed mutations that were beneficial that help them deal with toxins. And we studying compensatory mutations, those are observed even more often in some cases than deleterious mutations. So not all mutations are good, but combined with selection, the whole process is self-improving because the mutations that are bad just get trashed.
Appreciate the answer. True, you can respond in a quick response if you want. Yeah.
Oh, can you guys hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah, well, I mean, I would say that no, there has absolutely been no evidence that shows that uh, degraded chromosomes somehow would have saved the the
I just
fusion would
read
have
it to
saved
you.
it somehow. Well, you've read me an excerpt, but you haven't provided me it. I mean, give it to me on the side. I'll read it, and I guarantee you it doesn't say what you're claiming. I've had people citation bluff all the time because of the fact that I've read into this in the past. With all due respect, I mean, I really am not saying this to be insulting, but when I asked you about it, you obviously didn't know about it beforehand. And so after I asked you about it, you went and quickly Googled it. You've just now found out about this information. So I
Nope.
can take no, just with all due respect, going off of my knowledge in the past and researching this already, I already know, like I mentioned, the geneticists that I've been in touch with in the past, and some of the people watching know that I've read these emails out loud, that you're wrong, that there has been none of this actually has actually been shown. But if there's something different, and I haven't been given this link supposedly that you're reading from specifically, then I mean I'm more than willing to grant it. But I will say right now that more than likely it doesn't say what you're saying. You're only reading a couple of sentences here. I've had people citation bluff with me in the past. And if you want to extend this, actually, you guys want to go a little bit longer, we can read this through with one another together. I guarantee you that it doesn't say any. It's not going to prove in any way,
Yeah, that's
shape,
going to
or
have to be
form
an after
that it
show. We
wasn't
probably got to
easily done.
conclude this here. So we'll get to the next question and make it
Yeah.
short and pithy. So this is from Sigi Ferredo Sarabi again for $5. Appreciate your super chat. What poison egg laying webbed foot milk giving bill tooth fur covered animal create the platypus during evolution? So I think that's for Snake, but I think True can answer that if he wants to respond to that too. It's cool.
Its parent would be almost identical to it. So, I mean, mammals came from reptiles, so they would be egg laying. Uh, there are reptiles who have evolved live birth, so they just hatch their eggs inside them. None of these things are not covered by variation. Hair is made from the same protein as scales. We know that that's possible to get a really thin scale. Um, Not sure what the problem is there.
Sure, you can respond to that if you want, or we go to the next. We can get on to the next super chat.
No, I've got nothing to say about it.
Okay, so this is from Brian Stevens. This of his super chat. Wow. It's okay, Brian Stevens. Here's from Rayward. Phylogenics software is based on simulating millions of generations. Ronnie, you can't observe that, but it's real data. So that's for True if you want to respond to that.
I'm sorry, bro. Can you repeat that? I broke up
Sure.
there for a second.
Phylogenetic software is based on simulating millions of generations, Ronnie. You can't observe that, but it's real data.
I mean, that I have no problem with that. I mean, you can simulate all the data that you want, but phylogeny, I mean, with all due respect, if you look at it from the perspective of, I mean, it's not a respectable science to me, anyways. I mean, I've talked about this in the past and length, but to me, it's one of those. It's very religious to me. I mean, it just all comes down to subjectivity when I'm looking at phylogeny or even taxonomy. So I mean, I can't get anywhere with similarities. I can't get anywhere with what you want to do subjectively with the data, but I would acknowledge that the data, there is data there. There's data that can look at the similarities and differences. It's just whether or not we can attach our look at it from the angle that I looked at it at cup A, B, and C. You don't get to say your conclusion is a legitimate conclusion until you actually have evidence to show that your conclusion is likely. There are three options on the table. We don't know what's going to happen if you allow the changes to continue. You don't just declare what you can perceive will happen because of the dots that you connect in your head. And so looking at the similarities with the data that you have at your disposal doesn't mean that you get to dictate your conclusion. There are other options on the table that are just as likely. If we all just get to declare our conclusions because we all have our own subjective perception of that data, well, then there's nothing we can do with it. So
Okay.
that's the way that I logically, it's not dealing with.
Very good. Appreciate your answer. This is from Philip.
Can I respond?
Yeah, I'll go ahead, Snake, real quick.
So phylogeny and the nested hierarchies generated from that somehow match and predict the pattern of the fossil record. So the conclusion is so obviously likely that it's convinced nearly the entire scientific community. Um,
Well,
and
actually,
I don't see how that's possible to be able to match the pattern so precisely and predict it so precisely
no.
if it's just pareidolia.
Well, the problem is that we've actually found the opposite of what's been claimed. And for example, the idea is that the deeper you go into the fossil record, for example, the more primitive the organism is. The reality is that the further back you go into the fossil record, you start to see certain spurts in, like the mammalian radiation or the, things like that.
Yeah, we got to make this short and pithy, you guys. And
I'll make it as short as I can. But if you go back down to one of the earliest eras of the fossil record, the Cambrian, below that, Precambrian, about 580 million years. That's how long it took, I believe. We have almost no evidence of all the major phyla coming into existence: the chordates, the echinoderms, and so on. And so you don't even have evidence for the major phyla coming into existence. Only a couple of Bufana, cyanobacteria, and so on below there. So if you don't have evidence for that, I don't get how you get to claim that all this evidence is diverged here or there. That's factually the case. That's not what we see. Certain areas you can say that we see divergence, but it's factually the case that at the bottom of the fossil record we see complexity. We don't see simplicity.
Okay, so I thank you for your answer. So we got to get to Philip Servin Jack for $5. Appreciate your super chat. True empiricism. I don't think you understand why scientists use simulations. We simulate a theory to see if its predictions are confirmed in reality.
Okay, that's an assertion. I don't care about that. I mean, if we're talking about a simulation from a computer program that was developed by an intelligent agent, that means that there was an intelligent agent that set things in motion. Okay, so if I was talking to a theistic evolutionist, okay, well, that's something that I can entertain. But then we're going to start leaving the confines of science that doesn't try to entertain the notion of God. Typically, unfortunately, that's how modern science tries to deal with science now. And so, according to evolutionary theory, it is an unguided process via natural mechanisms that cause things to diverge. And so when you start inserting God as a mechanism, I think that most evolutionists, mainstream scientists would have a problem with that when you insert God into that. I wouldn't have a problem with that, but then again, we're shifting the goalposts. We're not dealing with the argument that's at hand right here. And so the simulation argument, it is a problem. You don't get to use that. The creator at first sets things in motion and then things can start to act upon itself. That's a theistic argument, but it doesn't work when we start talking about it from a scientific perspective, what naturally can actually occur, what's actually been shown inside of the literature. And so it's a simulation. I can entertain that, but it's not answering this question. We're trying to see whether or not.
Yeah, we got to wrap that up real quick. And then Snake, you can quickly respond to that if you want.
Yeah, so it doesn't matter what the origins are. We can still scientifically study the change in the system. And you just repeated the terrible misconception that evolution is unguided. I mean, we've been over this several times. It's guided by the environment. So again, origins don't matter. We can still scientifically study what happens after that.
You're saying origins. You're the one saying origins. By you saying
I'm saying
origins,
it doesn't matter.
You're bringing up a red herring, so you don't have to deal with your burden of proof.
No, I'm saying it doesn't matter. I'm isolating the variable.
It doesn't. You're right. It doesn't matter to this argument here because I'm not talking to a theistic evolutionist. Your job here is to prove evolutionary theory, not talk about an argument for a theistic evolution.
Evolutionary theory doesn't hinge on origins, though. That's the point.
What evolutionary theory doesn't do is insert God, right? You talked about what
so it's irrelevant.
Do mainstream scientists accept you inserting God as a mechanism for how evolution?
I'm saying it's irrelevant.
You start talking about creation over time. You're not talking about theistic. You're not talking about evolutionary theory. You talk about creation over time when you insert God.
Let's quickly wrap this up so we get to the next super chat.
How do you not understand that?
Origins are irrelevant to the change of the system after origin.
I'm not saying origins are relevant. I'm talking about you inserting God to make a different argument rather than defending the argument you're supposed to make.
I'm not. I'm saying inserting God wouldn't change.
All right, let's wrap it up.
Exactly what you're doing. That's
Nope.
exactly what you're doing.
Nope.
All right, so
Yeah.
our
Not even
next.
slightly.
Okay, let's get to the next super chat. Sigi Fredo Sarabia for $2. Appreciate your super chat. Does the origin of viruses disprove evolution? We'll go ahead and let Truett respond, and then you can Snake.
But does the origin of viruses, he said?
Yeah, disprove evolution.
No, I don't think it would. Why would I need more clarification?
I think the fact that diseases exist kind of proves evolution, because what nasty ass on the ark had all those diseases? That's
Okay.
my thoughts.
Okay, so we'll get to the next one. Appreciate your answers. Steven Steam from 199. Nothing evolves, especially praises Avatar. Boom! Yeah, that's a sweet avatar right here. That's what I look like. That is me right there. Just kidding. Okay, appreciate that, Steven Steed. So we go to the Undead Christian for $10. Appreciate your super chat. If you are theists and believe in God, why do you think God would give man the burden of proof such a change through evolution? Why wouldn't God just create us to what he ultimately wants us to look like? I guess you could respond to that first, Drew.
Why wouldn't? Can you repeat that first part, please?
Yeah, sure. If you are theists and believe in God, why do you think God would give man the burden of proof of such a change through evolution? Why wouldn't God just create us to what he ultimately wants us to look like?
Such a change in evolution. Well, here's what my take is on this. I think that humans you see a variety of humans. I mean, Homo neanderthal, for example, they were humans. They had bigger noses. They had, they were shorter, had, probably no waist, but they were humans. And I think that, humans have always been humans. I don't think that there's been any changes with humans that even leads any confusion. I mean, if you look at Homo erectus, archaic, and Neanderthal, like I brought up earlier, and then you look at Australopithecus and some of the early apes, it's not what evolution has claimed, where you see this small gradual developments of humans from apes. That's not what you see at all. As a matter of fact, I've shown some videos on my channel from what mainstream scientists who are not creationists. They will tell you that the amount of evidence that they have for human beings and their divergence, you could fit inside of a shoebox. All they have are two teeth or certain bone fragments that they use mirror imaging techniques to get a better idea of what they actually are. What you see in the museums is not necessarily what they actually have. And so what you're actually looking at, and evolutionists like to bring up Pokemon evolution, is you have apes and then you have humans. You don't see any of this the divergence. You see something distinctly ape and you see something that is distinctly human, a divergence of humans. Homo erectus, Homo neanderthal, Denisovans, those, they're all humans. So there's no confusion there. I don't think that God has caused any sort of confusion here. I think that people trying to superimpose their conclusions on bone fragments that are constantly coming to different conclusions over those bone fragments, they're the ones who are causing the confusion. But I mean, there's no confusion. All you see there in the fossil record is apes and then humans, and then people trying to muddy the lines to try to make whatever apes appear to be more than what they are, or human beings appear to be less than what they are, so that they can connect that. But there's no confusion. It's just
Gotcha. Thanks for your answer. Do you want to quickly respond to that, Snake? Or
Yeah, I think it would take a greater God to make a complex system like evolution than just to, poop out whatever he was thinking of. I think it's a much more complex and beautiful system. And if God is creating us separately, he should have put way more effort into interrupting the nested hierarchies, like giving penguins fins that are just have nothing to do with other bird wings. Instead, penguins have bird wings instead of fin bones, or giving all ape genes, putting them all in completely different locations than their homologs in humans would also be a good interrupter there. Because true empiricism is accepting genetic and physical similarities as relationships, but up to some undefined point. So God could have made the evidence way more obvious so that there's no confusion about this at all.
What do you mean?
Gotcha.
Undefined voids. I mean, I think that the point is very clear. I brought up the example with chimpanzees and humans for a specific reason, right? You want to talk about the 96, 98% difference? Fine. We can talk about similarities all day long so that you can connect dots and use your pareidolia. But it's the differences that you have to account for. So that 3-4% difference, what is different there? Okay, get into that. See whether or not evolution can deal with those differences, because that's the claim here, right? We become distinct as our offspring continues to give
Let's
birth.
quickly wrap it up. We got a question for you coming up here, True. So this is from Brian Stevens. Praise, good question. So this is genetic algorithm is a working model that shows how randomness can achieve a goal over time. This has been exploited to TE, theory of evolution. So you want to respond to that, both of you guys?
Was there a question there? Or just a
Yeah.
statement?
So I'm not sure where the question. So he says it's a question. So genetic algorithm is a working model that shows how randomness can achieve a goal over time. This has been explained to TE, so that would be theory of evolution.
Of course it is.
True empiricism. Sorry.
Well,
So I would.
I've not heard anything. All I heard was an assertion that genetic algorithms prove something, just like I heard of fins and similarities prove something. But I mean, I've not seen any evidence. So if there's evidence, I need to see it.
Yeah, so evolutionary simulators do accurately represent reality and the mechanisms we've observed in reality. So I'm not sure what amount of difference he's trying to say proves that they're not related, or what amount of difference we need to prove that they are related.
Gotcha.
That's the question. Why do you have to have? Why do you have to have a computer simulated program to do work for you instead of looking into the natural world and seeing if these
Because it's
phenomena
faster.
actually can be emerged?
Because it's faster.
Well, we've done fruit fly experiments on fruit flies for about the last 100 years. The last a couple of decades, we've been increasing mutations by 1,500 times using X-ray machines, and we see them devolve. We see them becoming less healthy. They have shorter lifespans. They can't breed in many cases. Same thing with the 4,400 generations of pathogens. So it's not that it's less shorter. We've had many, many, many examples of overbreeding and continuing to breed to see whether or not an accumulation of changes can cause something to develop distinctive traits, and they seem to actually devolve. And so instead of you dealing with the problem, it seems like you're going to a computer simulated program that was set in motion by intelligent agents. Right? They don't have their own preconceived notions, to start with. I mean, there's a whole thing there we can get into, but you don't want to deal with the natural world to actually see if anything in the world that we're living in can actually show your truth. Instead, you want to jump to a computer program that would be an argument for theistic evolution. It's not an evolutionary argument. And so, is evolutionary theory imaginary? I mean, I
But
don't think we can.
it hasn't all been in the same experiment. All those fly experiments were all separate experiments. So the computer can do millions of generations in the same experiment. And with bacteria, we have observed evolution, not devolution.
You missed the point entirely. That's the point. I mean, we can actually test, and we have been testing for years and years and years with many different organisms.
Not in the
Why
same
do
experiment.
Why is it that we were looking? Yeah, in your experiment, you get to test it in a simulation on a computer. My experiments that I'm bringing up are tests in the real world. Interestingly enough, in the real world, we find de-evolution, de-evolving, right?
And
Denaturing.
evolution.
And in your computer simulation, nothing in the real world, we see theistic evolution.
We
All
do see
right.
building of new proteins, though.
So I guess this is the last question of the night. This is from Stripper Liquor. So modern day debate praise. Can you settle a bet, please? Are you a believer in a flat Earth or a globe Earth? Thank you. I thought I made that pretty clear, and I debated. Um, the guy's Nathan Thompson, and yeah, I was the negative on that, and I went against Nathan Thompson. I wasn't prepared for the flat Earth debates because they have a different scope of different of arguments. I wasn't prepared for those, but I was actually prepared for a theological debate, and I was ready to show that I'm actually a polemic against the flat Earth. So no, I'm not a flat Earth follower, but I love my brothers and sisters in Christ that believe in flat Earth. So it may have seemed that way because I love my brothers and sisters in Christ. So there, hopefully that answers the question. So is there any other? You guys want to end up here with your final conclusion, like a couple ending remarks before we get off here? Or
Well, I'd just say I think I tried to debate Nathan Thompson, and he said he would only do it based on biblical stuff. So you probably should have won that one.
yeah, I was
I'm
prepared
sure
for
you did.
that.
That's a pretty easy one.
Yeah, I'm more of a polemic theologically against. I'm not sure. True, are you a flat earther? Because I thought I heard that. I'm not sure though.
Yeah, there's a lot of things that people say about me.
I think
But,
that guy
Never
that guy
have been-
Wotan sounds a lot like you.
Yeah, maybe that's where we get mixed up with.
I don't even know who that is.
In fact, did they slate Wotan part of tonight's debate? Wow, they can easily confuse True with Wotan. But I appreciate everyone coming in tonight, everyone in the chat, all your super chats. The contestants tonight was a good discussion. It got a little heated, but that was good. That's passionate about your belief, your viewpoints. And so we're going to probably end it here. So we're going to say keep sifting out what the reasonable from the unreasonable. Thank you and good night.